Greetings, this is Illiterate. My name is Evan.
My name is Taylor. I read an article this week.
I watched a documentary series this week. We are covering Showtime's UFO. This is not your typical UFO alien documentary thing. This is a kind of a once-over. This is because something has happened in popular media, in the news, in our recent time that has changed this conversation. It centers around primarily an event that happened in 2004 that has some of the most incredible eyewitness accounts. Pentagon footage released that sparked a New York Times article in 2017 that has really sparked a cavalcade of information thus far coming out. We're living in a new time when it comes to UFOs, so we thought this was a good time to pick it apart, talk about UFOs and art, and what to make of all of this. So I'm really excited. Come along.
Because here, that is the question. What's the news here? Are we confirming the existence of them? Has this already been done? Do you remember Roswell? How did that get, all that kind of stuff hopefully will touch on and make sense of why is there a different documentary happening now that isn't Ancient Aliens Made the Pyramids on the History Channel.
There are hundreds and thousands. There's thousands of pieces of content. Go on YouTube. I mean, endless.
Yeah. The
History Channel died on this hill.
Right.
So this is part of the problem. Is it's always so much, and so much is so faulty.
Yeah,
but it's getting better.
You'll love this in terms of statistics. 95% of the public had heard about UFOs as a concept, and 92% had heard about President Gerald Ford. He had just left office 9 months ago, and he was tracking worse than UFOs. So they're all over the place. And then,
my God.
Yeah. And then in terms of where we're talking about, hasn't this already been talked about? There was a poll in 96. 71% of the U.S. population said the government was covering up information about UFOs. So this is a commonly held belief, at least in the U.S., that the government knows things and we know it's there and they won't tell us. So this is
this is something I'm interested. I'm definitely interested in. Is like, where did the notion start of the distrust, the paranoia of the federal government?
Yeah,
and to what purpose? I'm super excited to see how UFO maybe has a component to where we have found ourselves now, and then maybe why all this is coming out now.
Right.
But perhaps it's best to start with the New York Times article from 2017 and get some context of what has changed, because this article is a touchstone and will be known as a touchstone thus forth in this field.
Right. New York Times, reputable to some, it at least is a massive news media organization, coming out with such a thing as, there's a secret government alien UFO, that's nothing to scoff at.
It's not usually something that headlines like one of the most revered publications on the face of the planet.
Right.
The people that write for the Times don't write stories about these things because it stands to risk their entire career. At least it did before this.
Mm-hmm. So what this was exposing was a secret program in charge of checking on UFOs, unidentified flying objects, things that the military of the U.S. government had positioned as, we don't know what this is, let's figure it out. And there was a program that was doing that, and money is being siphoned to it. Kind of probably what people think Area 51 is doing. That was happening. So it was called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. This is the first time a big news outlet got this verifiable information that the Pentagon is investigating reports of these sightings and what's going on.
That is part of it
them.
too, is the degree of journalism that they're doing is bringing it to lawmakers and senators and people that stand to have the power to make decisions in this. They have the degree of journalism that they're holding this up to is not just something you're going to find in every, a local newspaper or the National Enquirer or something like this. This is backed up and sourced by the real deal stuff. So when we say that this program has been confirmed, that means they have sources from the Pentagon that are on record confirming it.
Yeah. And the Pentagon, just for those that are a little shaky on it, the Department of Defense for the U.S. So it's the U.S. military. Sometimes it's the building itself, but mostly it refers to the machine that is the U.S. military is the Pentagon. So they are saying, yes, we had this program. And the program was started by 7 senators asking them to create a secret office in 2007, and it was revealed that it was disbanded in 2012, although the person who was in charge of it, Luis Elizondo, said he continued it until 2017, even though the money dried up. He's kept doing it until then. So this is when this article came out in 2017, and what it detailed was these specific situations, the main one being in 2004, where the U.S. Navy had a close call in Southern California. And the whole new millennium situation is they have footage of it. They have multiple sightings of particular phenomena.
This event is become the focal point for a lot of this article and the people talking about the significance of this article, because what you have are Navy pilots who have millions of dollars put into their training. These are the most certifiable, astute people in control of the most incredible weapons that we have at our disposal. So you have Navy pilots who are encountering on footage and on record. You can hear their conversations about this thing. They're encountering an object that moves both increase, decrease speed. It changes direction at a way that's impossible, in a way that we don't have the technology available to us right now that could,
and doesn't seem to have
those maneuvers possible.
Doesn't seem to have any propulsion, any wings, any sort of the traditional physical properties of a flying, moving object.
And they have the footage of it, which is kind of incredible. That the footage of it exists, that got leaked at all. I mean, we're talking about footage that's nearing 2 decades old, and that we just saw for the first time in 2017.
Right. Yeah. So David Fravor was the pilot, and 4 people also witnessed this, but he was the one in the plane. And then there was another situation in 2014 and 2015 on a different ship that features similar properties. Please go to the links and look if you clicked because you like UFOs or you haven't heard about this before, because the footage, Evan and I were talking about it before, but you have to kind of understand what it is. Otherwise, it just looks like a white dot in some gray.
Yeah, I mean,
background.
It's military footage. So when you look at it on the outset, it doesn't look like an image that you can identify. You're looking at a workflow and an image setting for they're trying to do other things that we are not in the military. We don't know what the object of this tool is, what the function of this tool is. So when you look at it at first, it's hard to understand. So it's really great to have the guys talking about what they saw, what they recorded, and what they were talking about, because these guys have come out after the breaking of the story, have come out and talked about it. There's an amazing Joe Rogan podcast with these guys that detail this event in the minutia of how it went down. So I'm not the biggest Joe Rogan fan, but as far as this kind of topic goes, you get just what I considered Joe Rogan like just kind of a normal guy asking really highly trained professionals about something that they should be able to explain but can't.
And also, if you're interested in this documentary but don't have Showtime, probably most people, the first episode is free on YouTube. Showtime put it up. So
yes,
I'll post a link to that.
And you'll meet a bit of these characters and understand a bit of the trajectory and some of these things that we'll bring up. But yeah, please check it out on YouTube. The first episode's up for free.
So then the news from all of this and what became of it, the big thing that happened was that the Pentagon acknowledged the videos in 2019, but didn't say anything about them. But then the Pentagon released them April of 2020, saying, yes, these are our videos. Yes, we don't know what they are. They're unidentified aerial phenomena. It was like sort of a joke because it got lost in the world chaos of April of 2020.
Right. This is as the pandemic is unfolding and becoming worldwide calamity. This amazing news on the alien front is hitting the airwaves, but it has no real estate when it gets there, because everybody's focus is rightfully somewhere else. When people say the world's crazy right now, this isn't even part of what they mean most of the time.
Right. And just to say, because we're using sort of UFO, UAP, which is unidentified aerial phenomena, alien, all these things interchangeably, but we're not referring to alien space creatures. It's just, this is a thing that's flying around that has not been determined to be anything, but it doesn't necessarily mean it even came from space or is manned by a creature or is even a physical thing. It could be an issue with the sensor. It just is a thing that is unexplained that has flown through, and people
they go out of their way to say in the documentary by one of the journalists for the Times article to say it's like the idea of the UFO It's not a question. UFOs are unidentified
Yeah.
flying objects. It's
Yeah.
not what they are. Fact is that they are there unidentified. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what 2017 really did is the government actually saying that they're spent money because those things are in the sky and they don't know what they are, or
Right.
at least they're interested to know what they are.
So because of all of that being released in 2020, the Pentagon acknowledging that this was their footage and they didn't know what it was, there was Marco Rubio, interestingly, as one of the senators, really helmed the UAP Task Force, because UFO is old news because it has too much of a stigma associated with
Right.
green men and flying saucers. So UAP is the new terminology. And this task force was started in August of 2020 with a mandate that they release a full report by the summer of 2021. And so I'll post a link because they issued this report on June 25th of this year. It's only 9 pages, so you could read it if you wanted to. But they discuss 144 observations, mostly from Navy personnel. And this is from 2004 to 2021. The interest that most people had with it was that they said one of the sightings was attributed to a large deflating balloon, which means the other 143 cases, they said there was too little data to determine what it was.
That is one of the closing facts of the show, which is like the documentary has a lot of different points of view of people arguing about what this could be and what is actually happening. Not so much saying that they have any answers, but it's trying to reframe the conversation, because what has happened since 2017 is we are in a new phase of this conversation. We kind of all need to be on the same page.
Right.
That's what this serves to do.
Like in this document, they're saying the purpose is not to evaluate a search for extraterrestrial life, but to assess the risk on the data for unknown aerial threats. And it's also kind of I guess it's called the collection bias, because most of these sightings are around naval bases, training grounds, all that stuff, but they also have the most sensors, radar, and attention to the airspace. So
it's like you're not going to get the thing flying off through the mountains in the middle of the Appalachian because there's no sensors and cameras in the middle of nowhere. You know, it's like, well, at the naval base, it might be lit up with things that are supposed to capture any activity at all.
Yeah. And of the 144, 18 of them, they indicated unusual movement patterns implying some sort of an advanced technology. Again, that could just be they have a secret operation that they're not talking about, or it's a private thing, or it's another country. But I just that's a big case
what it tries
of
to. The documentary tries to frame this conversation in all those different ways. It's trying to say it's like, well, some of these could be explained. The government might outright know what some of these are, but some of them it might not know exactly what they are. Or some of them it might know it's a different country running some sort of test. But from our point of view as the public, that's not so easily discernible, and it's not so easy to communicate that in a way that doesn't completely give away the form.
That was what was so crazy, is the Pentagon saying, yep, these are our videos. Yep, we don't know what they are. Because before it was,
you see something, here it is. Like that has never happened before. And the fact that they did that at all, that is the thing here, is that they have confirmed this seemingly for no reason.
Is it reverse psychology?
Why are they
giving they do know, then here comes,
And then we have to consider the day and age we find ourselves, the communication age. So now the public pressure, thus from the 2017 article, has the public pressure been insurmountable to the point where they found, you have to release you have to release something? Is that where we are now? Where versus something like, if you want to take up the Phoenix Lights that happened in the late 90s, which they bring up in the documentary, that was reported and seen thousands of times that night. Calls into news stations, radio stations. There's plenty of footage of it, but again, it's the 90s. It's not the best footage, and it's not a bunch of sources.
We'll put some links.
If that event were to happen today, you would have thousands of people pulling out their 4K cell phones and pointing it at the sky, and it would be unavoidable. The pressure to explain it would be unavoidable. So I'm wondering if that is where we have found ourselves, where it's like, well, more people are interested in this. And the more people that are willing to speak up and ask the question, the less likely that the government can ignore it at all. Because that's what happened with Phoenix, is there's not enough evidence really, and it kind of got laughed off the stage. I don't know that would happen if the Phoenix Lights were to happen today.
Yeah.
So it's just there's a lot going on in this field, and like that the government is admitting that we don't understand exactly why they would be admitting it, because they're not giving away the farm. Why did they find it necessary to say yes, it's there at all?
Right.
That's I think is the conversation, and why
Mhm.
everybody is on their toes right now about what is happening.
Well,
But
that's a
maybe
good
they
se-
did, and maybe that was my other point. Maybe all the pressure, the public pressure, is maybe they did. I don't know.
Yeah.
This is the conversation.
Well, that's a good segue to kind of the history of this as far back as it relates to unidentified flying objects, because the flying objects have been reported for much of human history. There's also some natural things, optical phenomena. There's one called parhelia, which makes it look like there's three suns or three bright lights at once when the sun is low in the horizon. There's lenticular clouds that look like saucers.
What?
And
Lenticular clouds?
lenticular
Hold
clouds,
on.
yeah.
Hold on, because I only know the word lenticular from like a print and media thing where like there's two images on one surface and you get like the animation between the two, basically.
Oh no,
You flip
it's
it
a
one
type
way,
of
it's
cloud.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Lenticular. So what is a lenticular cloud?
I don't know the exact air patterns and whatnot, but it does. I'll post
Yeah.
links. It looks just like it's like a flat, squat kind of flying saucer looking thing.
Oh, weird.
For example, it happens a lot on mountain peak structures. So, like, I'm sure you've seen a picture of Mount Fuji, where it's got kind of this flat cloud hanging over top of
Oh, yeah.
the
Okay.
top of it. Oftentimes, it's not related to that, and it's just out in the open.
Interesting.
So anyways, there's those sorts of natural phenomena that, of course, these things can be ascribed to. But also, like you were talking about, they're reported way more in San Diego Naval Base than they are in the middle of Kentucky because of the recording technology. People often look back to medieval, classical, Renaissance paintings to see, because they would have no basis for what these things are. But is there evidence of that?
There was a really fascinating point in the documentary where they bring up I think a Greece or Roman scene in stone.
Right.
And the documentary has a historian that's also involved in all of these things that tries to explain how interpretation can really wildly vary perhaps what the initial experience was. And so what this does, and I'm trying to glaze over it because I don't remember the exact names of this particular thing.
Right.
But what this point in the documentary was trying to say is that throughout human history, there could have been some sort of contact that then got retold and then reinterpreted at that point, probably by the authority power, the church.
Right.
And then when that gets reinterpreted, that becomes part of the ore of religion. So it takes at least one instance where it says that like this woman had a encounter with an angel. But when that woman looked back at her recounting from the church, she said, that's not at all what happened. When she looks at like the statue that they made, is like that's completely different from my experience. So it's trying to get into that, like, well, this could have been happening for all of human history, and the powers that be muddle it and get in the way and interpret it differently for whatever purpose or accident.
The counter side to that, for the skeptics, maybe it's flipped the other way, where it actually is just religious iconography, and then people that want to see evidence of UFOs. So, for example, I'll post a link. There's a great article where this person sort of talks about the classic paintings and pieces from various time periods that UFO hungry people look at and say. So there's like the shepherds being told about Jesus from angels in a cloud. That is often immortalized and painted to look like
this is
a
very
floating
similar to
thing.
the one I was badly trying to talk about.
Right? No, that's fine. But similar, like there's sun and moon faces that are very common in crucifix scenes, and then they became people sitting in them but they look like manned spacecraft. But that's like a derivation of the sun and moon, and them being physicalized as either Greek gods or as just faces in those things. And then there's a famous one. There's this crimson disc that appears in a lot, but it was known to be Saint Jerome. He was a cardinal, and it's his hat sitting beside him. But it'll appear in like crucifix scenes and various other things unrelated to that. So that kind of stuff is also interesting, that it goes the other way too, where it's like, well, we're looking for evidence of this.
This is what because I mentioned at the top of the show that I was interested in how UFO, and conspiracy theory found us in where we are now. But that comes to a point. You have all of human history up until Roswell.
Right.
And then Roswell to now. And it seems like this is where it really solidifies.
Right.
Science fiction is a thing.
I'll draw the line for you how that
Yeah.
kind of comes to be. I was interested in the origin of the terms UFO, flying saucer. The earliest, which maybe is not as correlated to it, 1878, there was a farmer in Texas that claimed to see a large circular object flying at wonderful speed, in quotes. And the newspaper said...
Wonderful speed.
Yeah.
I love old
1878.
adjectives.
Yeah.
I really do. I think we've lost an art of talking. I wish that sports announcers still sounded like they were in the 1920s.
Yeah, he ran at wonderful speed into the end zone. Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. But anyways, the newspaper said it appeared from his perspective to be the size of a saucer, which doesn't really matter, but that's just the first association of that word with UFOs. But the real craze, 1947, put a pin in that year because June, there was a civilian pilot near Mount Rainier who saw 9 objects, flashes of light coming from them. I love this stuff because it's one of the most significant reporter misquotes in history.
Oh, no.
The pilot, civilian, Kenneth Arnold, said to the reporter that these flashes of light flew like a saucer if you skip it across the water. He was making an allusion to their movement, not what they looked like. Right. But the newspaper put them as flying saucers. And then all the newspapers caught on to it and said he'd seen flying saucers. And that was
so he was trying to say that they bobbed a little up and down as they went, right?
Yeah. These flashing lights, yeah. But by July 4th, this happened in June, by July 4th, hundreds of reports in newspapers of other people seeing flying saucers everywhere. And then here is Roswell, July 7th, 3 days later. There's a press release by the Air Force saying they recovered a flying disc, and then they immediately recanted and said it was a weather balloon, and then people were like they were alien bodies, and then they took them, and the whole modern mythology of that comes into play. And later they said, we had to say it was a weather balloon because actually it was a thing that we had made that we were researching against Russia, but we couldn't say that. So they had to double back.
That became the
5
official
times.
story, is that there was this balloon that they didn't want out, that they had that kind of technology that they could float something at that kind of altitude over a country like Russia. So that kind of became the official story. But when you look at the way that those balloons are constructed, photos of them at the time, and then photos of the material collected at Roswell, it's like a far stretch to be like, yeah, that's exactly that. It's like the entire Roswell incident, just about every part of it is under question. And it seems like that event alone could use some real definitive investigation.
Now robust. It's become a myth. Now it's become I was reading an article where they were talking about it literally follows the 5 stages of something being turned into a myth, and we can't shake what it is it's like anymore.
I would love a definitive piece about this. And I bet too many people are lost now. Too much information is gone, but it seems like an event that could use credible scrutiny in this day and age. Because if this event alone had more known about it, there would be less to say in this documentary.
But it is interesting in terms of 1947, the questioning of, flying saucer, hundreds of people start seeing them, and then the Air Force says, we got one. Oh, no, we didn't. Interesting that just in the span of a few weeks, the hype was building so much for flying saucers. So with that, the very next day, July 8th, after Roswell, there was a secret study that began on the best of all of these reports, which then became Project Blue Book, which lasted from 52 to 69. And this is where the term UFO gets coined, is in this project, where they're unidentified flying objects they're trying to identify.
I actually caught the first few episodes of, I think, the History Channel Project Blue Book. Came out a few years ago. Not bad. I was pretty impressed.
Yeah, there's
to be honest. The their sets and stages, their costumings, the period. They sell the period.
Mhm.
They sell the effects when they go to show you an event happening. That is where they put all their money in, trying to really sell it and it not look hokey like you would
Right.
think this would look on History Channel.
I will say one to avoid for the confusion's sake. Netflix released a series called Top Secret UFO Projects, literally came out the same week as this UFO one on Showtime.
Oh no.
Awful. It's
Oh,
way
no.
more sensationalist. It's got the deep voice announcer,
Mm.
terrible CGI, and interviews conspiracy subjects more than fighter pilots and senators and what this one is doing.
Like, professors and like,
Yeah.
like actual, like, yeah, this documentary is chock full of like credible people. This is why it's a standout, and this is why we're decided to cover this. Is
Yeah.
the Times article is bulletproof, and this documentary is full of the people you want to hear from.
Right. So speaking of hearing from people and credibility, this Blue Book study, 12,600 reports, 701 were classified as unexplained, but it was shut down. The funding, they said, couldn't be justified. And they said of all the things that they looked at, nothing was indicated as a threat. There was nothing that was beyond modern science, and there was no indication that it was from outer space in any way. So those were the
It's
three
so
things.
interesting because as you're talking, I'm like remembering more about the show, and I'm like remembering the conceit of the show was like these guys are basically called in to head up this BS office that the
Mhm.
government does not believe in. It's
Right.
like they literally are doing Project Blue Book so that they can say we looked into it and there's nothing there.
Right.
And they basically tell these guys to say as much.
Right.
I just as you were talking, I remember it's like, oh yeah, there's like I remember they were really intrigued by a few things that then they're like didn't have the resources to be
Mhm.
able to actually track down and found themselves bumping into red tape.
Well, and that's what, is so telling in terms of getting this done was because by the end of 1947, the critical year, another poll, 90% of people had heard the term flying saucer. It was everywhere.
God.
Every single person in
Wow.
America knew about this.
That
So
is
you would have to
crazy in 1947.
Right.
I
From
talk
June
about
to
the
the end of the year.
communication age that we find
Yeah.
ourselves in and how jaded we are about just how flippant our communication is, how easy it is to get in contact with one another and spread information. In 1947, for a new term to be sensationalized like that to 90%, to the point where I'm like, when's that statistic about Truman? It's like, this is insane.
Or Gerald Ford in the 70s.
Ford,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah. So that's perhaps part of it. And then again, this is why the release in 2017 of they started it up again after 2004 was shocking to people. Last little thing about saucers, because we'd be remiss to say they had been around in sci-fi art back to 1911, and then they were very big in the 1930s pulp sci-fi magazines. So people were more receptive to the idea of such a thing leading up to 1947. It wasn't like this guy was misquoted in the newspaper and then suddenly it was all over the place.
Suddenly saucers are propagated.
Yeah,
That the saucer had been an image.
Mhm.
And they probably, the misquote comes from them being more aware of that already.
From sci-fi.
And
Yeah.
having him say the word saucer is like a saucer if you were to skip it across the lake. And they're not listening to him. They just hear saucer because that's like the book they read a few years ago. Like, oh,
Yeah.
that's what you saw. It's like, no, it was bobbing up and down. It's like, no, I got you. It was a round disc like a plate. Like, no, it was.
Yeah. So another shape thing that's interesting. This was in 2019 when this footage had happened. It was on the USS Russell of all ships. And this is night vision footage. It was a part of the leak in 2017, but it was not acknowledged by the Pentagon, but they did acknowledge it in April of 2021. And these are these pyramid-shaped objects over this ship's deck.
Ooh.
So I'll post a link to that video as well, because the Pentagon did not publicly release it because it was from a private, it wasn't, a camera on a plane, but it was from somebody on the deck. But they did say it was on the list of the things they're looking into with this new unidentified thing, which is pretty crazy that more footage is coming out and then more the Pentagon is saying, yep, we're looking into that too. Don't know what it is.
There was one piece of exchange that I actually was comical. It was at an airport, and it was air traffic controllers trying to get clearance of planes coming in and out. There was somebody radioing into the tower because they saw a disc hovering over one end of one of the runways. And so they're calling into the air controller. This is crazy, but I keep hearing reports about like a saucer, some sort of object over like post C-17. Can you take a look? Can you see it from there? We can't see it.
Right.
And they're like joking. They're like, oh, this sounds crazy. Can you look up for it? And he's like, I guess I'll take a look for you, but I'll tell you, I wouldn't even tell you if I did see something like that. And it's like, I know it's one of those things, but I just want you to look. And they're joking. But this goes on for another half hour. More people trying to call into the tower. And then that same person calls back and they have a very different conversation about like, look, I'm not on drugs. I'm not high. I'm not like, you need to look out over C-17 because there is something out there. It's like hearing the tone shift in conversation. It's like what, and the air traffic controller literally says like, I wouldn't even say anything about it if I did see something, which says to me everything about why people don't come forward, why a lot of the even pilots involved with some of these sightings won't put their name to the story. How it is that only now credible academics are coming to the subject, because to do so before now risked your entire career, no matter what it is, as an air traffic controller, as a Navy pilot, as a journalist, as a professor. If you were to delve your toe into these subjects, you are really putting up your career as collateral.
Yeah. I think that one was the O'Hare one. And I think what you're talking about in terms of being able to verify, not that you need video footage, but I think that was 2006 or 2007.
Yes, it was rather modern, yeah.
And so, but not modern enough for everybody on the tarmac to have a cell phone.
To have their phone. Exactly,
yeah. Talking about observations, this is kind of our ending, what to make of it. There's a great book, which I guess it's not great in terms of reading it, but as a reference, it's called the UFO Sightings Desk Reference. And it is a summary of the 121,000 accounts of UFO sightings corroborated by various organizations. And it's organized by state. There's no narrative. It's just 371 pages of charts and graphs and where they were and what they were in each county. But it has some fascinating sort of data stuff. So like observations almost quadrupled. There was 3,000 in 2001 and then almost 12,000 by 2015. So this book details it by county. And some other interesting thing, just like, I don't know, if you were a data analyst, it'd be a great book to look at if you believed in the veracity of all of these. But like, why is July the busiest month for seeing?
Oh, weird.
Of all the months.
That's what they say in Predator. They say in the hottest years this happens.
Yeah.
This year it grows hot.
Yeah, maybe people are outside more. But the interesting thing is Mississippi sightings spike in January. For some, stuff like that. Or the fact that Los Angeles County alone has more sightings than 40 other states. So perhaps because of the population and then the weather. And the weather draws people outside. People are outside more versus even in New York City. It's just interesting.
Well, that thing, what you're saying, from 2001 to 2015, it grew exponentially. It went from how many, 1,200, 1,500, right, to then 12,000.
Yeah.
It's like, well, the iPhone was released in 2007. So that changed the way that we communicate. It changed communication flat out. The BlackBerry died that day. So,
and from this book, at least every county in the U.S. has seen at least one UFO. So they have been a sighting.
It seems that the mounting pressure, because we're getting to why now. Why does the Pentagon feel pressured to...
Why is this kooky field getting legitimate?
Right. It's like, well, because everybody is armed with a 4K camera and video technology in their pocket. And so when they see something crazy, they can just capture it in a way that has never been possible before in human history. I mean, we really have to take into account the technology available literally at our fingertips on a mass scale, and what that amounts to in evidence, and what that looks like when you are shoving it in a government agency's face.
Yeah.
I mean, the mounting pressure has got to be fantastic here. So that we might be answering part of the question. It's like, well, why now? It's like, well, because there's so many more people that have a conduit to get their voice and evidence out there, that now to ignore it.
This pilot would have just lived his happy life, or, been made fun of by his shipmates or whatever. But now he's on the Joe Rogan podcast, which has 400 trillion people listening to it. How would he, how do you, even that, the access to people talking about it legitimately versus being debunked as foolishness. Yeah.
So there's a lot of moving pieces to this puzzle. There's a lot to look forward to here because what we got is the government saying you saw it, and that's more than we've ever gotten before.
And saying we don't know versus we know or shut up or you're crazy or whatever.
Exactly. And that's the next step of that conversation is, well, what do you know? Like, is it ours? We are all buckled up and we'll be going along together to see these questions drawn out in real life. So that's why we did this episode. And I hope that any of this was informative or interesting to you at all, because we thought what a fun subject. I really thank you guys for coming along on this journey. Thank you, Taylor, for the research. I know it was a little bonkers this week, but we had a lot of fun, so I hope you did too. Reach out to us on Instagram at ILLITERATEPod. Let us know what you are reading. Let us know what you're watching. Let us know what you're excited for. If something's coming out, a book, a show, anything like that. You never know when we will do something on just what you want to know about.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week.